Hello, all. Welcome to the Movie Bears podcast. I'm Brad Harris, and each week I'm joined by some of my favorite husky, hairy, huggable homos to talk about something near and dear to our hearts. That, of course, being movies. We love them. We see many of them every year. This week is no exception. We're going to be talking about the newest Star Wars film from the Disney fied franchise, now that Disney has taken over with their colossal amounts of money and creative talent. Was Solo a boon or a bust? We're going to talk it through. We will see. But before we tackle any of that, let me introduce you to two guys I literally could not live my life without. Jim Pugliafrico is here with us as usual. Babe, welcome back to the show. Hello.
Hey, babe, and thanks, and welcome to the podcast, everybody.
And Will Lindis is here as well. Welcome, Will.
Hey there, you scruffy looking nerf herders. I couldn't live my life without you guys either. So excited to do this with you guys again tonight.
Aw. Well, definitely pumped to have this discussion with you guys. I think I know where some of this is going to come down, but we'll see if my thoughts are right. Before we jump into our movie discussion, though, I do want to give a couple more hellos. We've got a few folks hanging out with us in the live chat. Definitely feel free to drop your thoughts about Solo in the live chat. But Adrian Charlie, our friend from Green Screen of Death podcast, is already active in the chat. He says, "Go Brad, Will, and Jim are rebel scum." So take that for what you will, guys.
Brad is channeling Obi-Wan right now, and he's like, "Help me, Adrian. You're my only hope."
But we're the rebel scum, right? So that means I don't know. You like the Emperor? I don't know.
Brad's the Emperor. Yeah.
I'm the.
Are you a Sith Lord?
Your faith in your friends is your weakness.
There you go.
I don't know. I don't do a very good Ian McDermott, I guess. But hey,
stay tuned for Movie Bears After Dark, where we find out who shoots first.
Well, actually, in any event, Steve Sosa is in the chat with us as well. Hey, Steve, welcome. Yeah. Glad to have you with us. And a big hearty hello to everyone who's listening days, weeks, months, years, decades from now. Glad to have you guys with us as well, maybe on your morning commute to work, while you're on the treadmill, at the gym, wherever you're listening. We're glad to keep you company. All right, so we got a lot to talk about. Solo, I suspect, is a very divisive topic for a lot of people. If you've been watching Reddit and Twitter and Facebook and Box Office Mojo and everything, really, where discussion and numbers happen, there's a lot to unpack here. So this week, no movie news. It's one of those rare occasions where we've got so much to talk about. We're just going to skip the movie news because there's kind of movie news rolled into this, maybe a little bit, question mark. We're going to talk about Solo completely spoiler-free for probably 10 or 15 minutes. If you haven't seen the film yet, and funny enough, after The Last Jedi, I know at least 6 people off the top of my head who refuse to see Solo. So it's possible for once there's a Star Wars movie that
quitters
you're tuning in for you haven't seen yet. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, not to worry, we'll give you a fair warning before we go into spoiler hyperspace. So don't fret. Guys, are you ready to go? Are we ready to do this?
I've got a good feeling about this. Yeah.
Punch it, Chewie. Uh-oh.
Say it again.
Punch it, Chewie.
Yeah. All right. Then here we go. Our discussion of Solo, a Star Wars story. All right. So when this movie was announced, a lot of people were like, really? A movie about a young Han Solo? Do we even need that? I think that question still remains. It is fair. But Jim, do us a favor. Kick this movie off. I mean, you can give us the bare bones basics of plot if you want. Of course, spoiler free. But also maybe chime in. Do you think this movie was necessary? What do you think?
Okay, that's a different question than whether I think whether I like the movie or whether I think it's a good movie. Those are all different questions, I think.
Let
when it
that
comes
question
to some of these.
guide your intro a little bit.
Right. All right. Great. Okay. So first of all, I want to say this movie, Solo, A Star Wars Story, was directed by, I think it's the second kind of standalone outside the main series of trilogies or whatever movie, second to Rogue One, which came out like 2 years ago now, I think. And this one's directed by Ron Howard, who at one point replaced Phil Lord and Chris Miller from the Lego Movie, who were in charge of this movie for a while. And, you know, the stories came out on the internet like a week ago that when they were replaced, Ron Howard like reshot basically 70% of the movie, or the final movie that we see on the screen. So a good chunk of it, to the point where Phil Lord and Chris Miller were removed as co-directors and now fall under like producers or executive producers or associate producers or one of those titles. But that's all like the inside baseball, behind the scenes stuff. But what's interesting to me about Ron Howard in this movie is George Lucas, who started the whole Star Wars thing with A New Hope back in 1977. That's over 40 years ago, 50? I don't know at this point. It's a long time ago. Ron Howard was in George Lucas's first movie before even Star Wars, American Graffiti, which we brought up on the show a couple weeks ago. He was a young Ron Howard was in that movie. And now here we've kind of come full circle with Ron Howard directing a Star Wars movie. So it's kind of a cool thing. Yeah, the circle is complete. That's right. Let me see you with my own eyes. Anyway, let me read the synopsis for the Solo movie. And this one sounds a little weird because I pulled it right off some synopsis. It says, it sounds like a carnival barker, like trying to sell me to watch the movie. Board the Millennium Falcon and journey to a galaxy far, far away in an all-new adventure with the most beloved scoundrel in the galaxy, Han Solo, following him through a series of daring escapades deep within a dark and dangerous criminal underworld. Han meets his mighty future co-pilot Chewbacca and encounters a notorious gambler, Lando Calrissian, in a journey that will set the course of one of the Star Wars saga's most unlikely heroes. So there you have the synopsis. No spoilers in there. We got Chewbacca back. We've got Lando Calrissian back. There's maybe a few more thrown in there, and we'll get to those. There's also some surprises in here. This movie has Alden Ehrenreich, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, as the young Han Solo. This one takes place about 10 years, right, before A New Hope.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right?
Somewhere in there, like 10 to 12.
Yeah, that kind of where it fits into the timeline. Alden Ehrenreich we've seen in Hail Caesar. I liked him in Hail Caesar. I think the guy's really good. We'll get to his portrayal of young Han Solo and how difficult that must be for an actor to come in and take over such a iconic character and try to pull that off. This one also has Woody Harrelson, Emilia Clarke from Game of Thrones, Khaleesi from Game of Thrones, Donald Glover, one of the hottest actors, musicians, commodities on the market today. He was also the last movie I really noticed him in the first one was The Martian. If you guys remember The Martian, he was one of the physicists, scientists guys trying to figure out how to get Matt Damon back to Earth. Not sure why he'd want to do that, but he had to do it. And then Phoebe Waller-Bridge, just a lot of talented people working on this movie. I sort of had an okay time with this movie, but the question you asked me, Brad, was this movie necessary? And my answer is a strong no. I mean, for me, it wasn't necessary. It didn't land. It wasn't something that I was looking to see. It didn't, for me, it didn't add anything to the Star Wars, it didn't add much of substance to either the character of Han Solo or the lore of Han Solo or the Star Wars mythos. And in fact, I think it might have actually even cheapened it a little bit by showing us some of those things that I don't think we needed explained. I think they were fine the way they were. And maybe I know I'm going to fall in one camp here. The movie, technically, I thought was fine. I had some issues with the way some of it looked, and we'll get into that. I don't know if it was cinematography or the way it was post-processed, but some of it looked rather like muddy, murky, and dark, with washed out, with not much contrast. At least in the screening we were in, and I think we see a lot of movies there, and their projection's pretty good. So I don't know if it was that, but yeah, I think for me, this is one I think for probably more for like hardcore Star Wars fans who want to know every little detail in the universe. I think this movie fills in a lot of those details. It doesn't further the story much at all, except there are some exceptions to that. I think I'd like to see more with the character that Emilia Clarke plays, and we'll get into that a little bit in spoilers, but I thought she was a good addition. Her character was a good addition. They kind of threw in a new story wrinkle, which I'd like to see them maybe continue in future movies. So that was kind of interesting to me. The rest of the Han Solo stuff was, well, we'll get into it more, but to me, it was kind of a check the box thing. Like, here's all the things we know about Han Solo. Now we're going to show you everything and kind of demystify his character a little bit. So anyway, that's me. I am very lukewarm on this movie. I don't know. It didn't. At the end, I'm like, it was a big so what for me.
All right. So is this like a soft pass for you, Jim? You think, like seeing it in theaters?
I think it's an okay movie for Star Wars fans. It depends who I'm talking to. For me, I could have done without this movie. But for someone who's more of a Star Wars aficionado, this is probably a movie you got to see.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you, Jim. Will, how about you? Where do you weigh in?
Yeah, it's hard to answer the question of, like, do we even need this movie? Because technically, we don't really need any movie. They're all here for either entertainment or education in some way, shape, or form, right? And so because I walked out of this movie actually thinking, like, I felt like this was unnecessary. We didn't need it. The gaps that were filled in Han's backstory didn't need to be filled in and were done so in a way that wasn't really engaging for me. But also at the same time, that doesn't matter. You know, if people go to the movies and they enjoy the experience and they have fun with it, it can be a retread, it can be whatever, it can be so what, and that still be okay. So for me though, I had some problems with this movie. I didn't hate it. As far as action adventure movies go, I think that this is probably above the pack, but I think that it's sort of below the standards that I would hold Star Wars as a franchise to. Prequels maybe notwithstanding. I agree with Jim. Like, the cinematography here was very dark and muddy, and I think that's because they were going for a darker tone. And I sometimes hate it when, like, when a cinematographer is like, the material is dark, therefore I have to make everything so muddy that the characters' features are blurred out. The first 3 scenes of this movie are set underground, set at night, and set underground. So, like, the first time you really get a chance to see like what Alden looks like as Solo, like well lit, is like 30 minutes into the movie. And I think that's a bit of a problem for a series that is designed. Star Wars as a franchise is based around, like, how much we attach to the characters, not just their growth arcs, but also their aesthetics and stuff like that. Whether it be really recognizable, like, cinnamon bun hairdos, or like the Chewbacca's cool little, like, crossbow bolt holster thing across his shoulders. You know, they have these design aesthetics that just didn't look very good until, like, later in the movie. Like, there were some scenes that lit things up a little bit more. I had the same problem with the third Star Trek movie, to be honest. The one that came out like a year or 2 ago. I think this film really tries to fill in a lot of the gaps, and some of them are really cool. The very obvious ones, like, how does he get the Millennium Falcon, and how does he meet some of the people that he meets? Those are cool. I wanted to see those. And by and large, it was cool to see those. But They also fill in some gaps for things that weren't really questions until they made them questions here. And it was sort of like, and we'll talk about what those are in spoilers, but there were some things that were really like, they were really padding the script to try to make this film more important than it needed to be. It didn't need to be important. It just needed to be fun. I didn't like Han's character arc. I felt like for the most part, he was the same dude at the beginning of the film as he was at the end. And again, they're playing the hits. You know, they want us to recognize Han and make sure that we know who this new guy is as Han, and we recognize him as being a Harrison Ford analog. But they do so at the expense, to me, of a really recognizable character arc, leaving some of those growth elements to some of the supporting characters instead. Supporting characters who are not important in the lore and who don't really have much of an impact. I was super happy to see Donald Glover's Lando. He was badass. He was very underutilized in the script, though. There are scenes where he's just kind of there. Phoebe Waller-Bridge steals the movie as L3, and I think she was the part that I most enjoyed watching, favorite character. Although they also do her very dirty. I have a rant when we get to spoiler section on her character. There's some cool stuff. The train scene is legit. There's some cool character stuff that happens towards the end of the movie that's fun. It's not a bad movie, but it's just, there's so many things in here that I could give kind of marks against it, just how it looked and how a lot of the characters acted and just sort of the unnecessary elements in the script that I just walked away from it with that. Jim, you said it perfectly, like the perfect review to sum up all of the words I've just spelled was sort of so what to me. I don't care to ever see this again. I think if someone wants to go see it, they're going to have a fine time. There's certainly worse that you could see at theaters, but this just didn't super excite me. So it's a soft pass if I have to put that type of label on it. But honestly, if you're a Star Wars fan, you should go see it anyway, because, I mean, we're living in this magic age right now where we went so many years without having these films, and now we're getting them regularly. I think there's something magical about living in this age and experiencing all of this. So go see it if you're a Star Wars fan, but I wouldn't say see it based on its merits as a film.
You know, it's interesting that, you know, you mentioned that, Will, because I've kind of been feeling the reverse lately. Like, Star Wars fatigue is like a real thing for me. Like, I'm ready for this new wave of Star Wars movies to be over at this point. And I'm like not even looking forward to Rian Johnson's new trilogy, which is a problem for me because we're going to have Star Wars movies till at least 2030, I'm sure. But I hear what you're saying, and you and Jim are both talking about like the dark color palette and how things look muddy and it's all, you know, toned down. I was thinking about I'm sorry, go ahead.
That was just a nit really for me. I mean, it was just a thing that I noticed. It didn't ruin the movie for me. It was just one of those things that, like, why am I thinking about this in these scenes? But yeah.
And so, you know, for me, I'm thinking back to A New Hope, and I'm thinking the first time we meet Han Solo is in a dark cantina. Then we see Han Solo aboard a dark ship. Then we see Han Solo aboard a dark Death Star. So, like, you know, hearkening back to New Hope, I was getting a lot of vibe from that movie, actually, in the cinematography. And sure, like in A New Hope, when we switched to outdoor scenes and Tatooine, like everything's bright. And there's a planet setting in this movie where things are outdoors and brighter. So, like, I actually felt like it was kind of connecting some of those cinematographical, that's not even a word, but things into this film. So I kind of dug that about this movie. You know, one of the complaints that I had about Rogue One was everything was super dark and super muddy and super dreary and super like Zack Snyder depressing. And so I think part of the problem is that, you know, given that Solo is the second of these standalone films, and now it's the second film that sort of has this similar cinematography to it, I think I almost start to feel like it's all sort of washed out and painted with the same cinematic brush. And I think that's an unfortunate problem for this movie, because it makes sense here to me that this movie about this like morally gray character who's not totally in the black, not totally in the white, like shades of gray, like we've got some of that going on. So, you know, it worked for me in terms of the question of like, was this movie necessary? I would say probably no, but I'll tell you, going into this movie, I was not excited to see it at all. You can ask Jim. I was just kind of like, do we really have to go? And I ended up loving this movie. It's not a perfect movie. It's not a phenomenal movie. But if you go into it thinking, hey, it's a fucking fun popcorn Star Wars movie, I think it executes very, very well. And I think it's unfortunate that so many people are like, we don't need a movie about a young Han Solo, or I really didn't like The Last Jedi, I'm not going to go see Solo. That mindset, I think, kind of precludes some of the cool stuff that happens in this film and colors a lot of that. This movie only made like $83.5 million opening weekend. Of course, that's not including today's numbers. I haven't looked at any updated numbers or projections, but obviously not as many people are going out to see this movie. And I think that's unfortunate because there's a lot to love here. For me, the big thing was Han and Chewie coming together for the first time. When you think about like iconic friendships or duos, like Lois and Clark, Peanut Butter and Jelly, Han and Chewie, like that's one of those super amazing friendships that always springs to my mind. But there's always been sort of just this mystery around like, you know, why is Chewie with Han, and what's this whole life debt thing about, and how did that happen? And for fans of the books, they kind of explore that. You kind of get to learn a lot about that and what happened, but we never get to see that happen in the movies. And so after having seen Solo, now I'm going back and I'm like revisiting like moments in Empire Strikes Back when Han Solo gets frozen in the carbonite and Chewie's all like super sad about it. It's like, why is he so upset? He's just a co-pilot. But their friendship is so much more than that. So I love seeing that fleshed out. I love seeing some of these new supporting characters come in. Emilia Clarke is Kira. I want a Kira movie, guys. I want to see what happens with her character. I kind of wish it was a standalone movie about her coming next instead of Boba Fett. But, you know, that's not going to be the case. It doesn't look like. So, you know, I kind of feel like I'm the lone voice on the show this week, kind of in support of this movie. I think it's super fun. I think it's worth your money. See it on the biggest screen you can with the best sound system you can. I think it's totally worth it. And we've got some folks in the chat too, who are kind of commenting as well. Jim, did you maybe want to start us off? Maybe pick a comment. It's been going a mile a minute. What do we want to touch on?
It's great. We're getting some really good participation. And Adrian from the Green Screen of Death is joining us here, and
Adrian,
we have old friend Ben in the chat, and they both say, you know, I'll read Adrian's. He says it didn't feel necessary going in, but he's glad that we were told this story. He loved seeing the background, meaning the background of Han Solo, and showing us why Han is the way he is. And Ben basically echoed the same thing, said it was good seeing Han's backstory. For the hardcore fans, it had plenty of action to entertain the non-fan. I guess I'm somewhere in between. Obviously, I'm not a non-fan. I've followed Star Wars from the get-go, but I'm not like a super fan either. I don't like dive into all the minutia from the prequels and know every single little side character that never appeared on screen but was mentioned. And you know, I'm not that kind of fan either. But yeah, I mean, like I said, if you're a Star Wars fan, I mean, I have nothing against Han Solo. He's interesting. My only deal was like certain things in the movie just fell flat for me. Like, and I'm not gonna spoil anything yet here, but we'll get to that. But there are things we knew about Han that I didn't have a burning desire to see played out on screen. Like, part of the thing, and I'm not going to spoil this movie, but I'm going to reference something that's well known in the other movies. When we talk about the Kessel Run in 12 parsecs, like it's a thing that we know about Han, and it's kind of a mythology that surrounds that character. You know, did he do it? Was it legitimate? He boasts about it all the time. Other people try to discredit him, and it's a really cool thing that they have it. But now to well, we'll get into it later, but like, I didn't need to see that like explored, I guess. I don't know. It just seemed very obligatory, I think is the right word. Like they had a checklist of all these things we know about Han, and they just kind of went down the list. All right, we got to show something about this. We got to show something about this. We got to show, you know, anyway, we'll get into spoilers, but one of the things I wanted to talk about that I did like is I actually like Alden Ehrenreich as Han Solo in this movie. I thought he did a commendable job. This is a really hard thing to do because he's got to be believable as young Han, without looking like he's doing a full-on impression on one side, or totally not believable at all. And it's a hard thing. It's a hard line to walk. I thought he did a fine job, as fine as probably could have been done by an actor in that role. So I was fully on board. I found myself watching him saying and seeing certain like facial smirks and stuff like that, the glint in his eye. And I'm like, yeah, I believe that as Han Solo. That's what I would expect to see out of a young Han Solo. Did you guys like that?
I was okay on it. I think that ultimately, like, I don't think I was impressed with him. There were a couple people on the cast I wasn't terribly impressed with, but I think that he did fine enough because I think that the way this character was written and the way that he had to be written sort of put him in a box. You couldn't have him be too dramatically different from Han, because if you did, then people would immediately say, well, that's not my Han. Why the fuck is he doing this thing? So you have to have him on an arc that is basically like sort of similar to Han at the beginning of the movie and similar to Han at the end of the movie, which hurts him here, but is probably helpful in the grand context of connecting him to, the Harrison Ford character. So it's almost a damned if you do, damned if you don't type situation. I do think Brad hit on something before that I wanted to echo, and that's, I think there's some negative discourse about this movie that's been distasteful. I walked out of the movie not enjoying it, but that's because I watched the movie and made up my own mind for it, right? But there is some discourse about like, I'm not going to see these because there's this weird like thing because there's like female and black characters that are of prominence. There is a vocal group that is boycotting this movie, and that is ugly and that is disgusting. There's also a lot of people who aren't seeing it because of other films, and the thing is this movie does exist, it does exist connected to the other films, of course, but it is its own thing, and it should be judged as its own thing. So it's one of those things where it's like, I wish that this could be more of like a playful, like, I wish this could be more of a playful, like, yeah, I kind of like this a little bit more. Yeah, I like this a little bit less type thing. But there's a weird, like, weight of negativity that's been attached to people's stance on this film. And that's made it a little more uncomfortable to talk about. Do you guys feel that as well?
I've seen a lot of that actually on Reddit. So I went out of my way to not read anything about this movie as much as possible before I saw it. But after I saw it, I'm like, all right, the lid's off. Let's go to Reddit. And I didn't even know that there was this huge like outcry over Lando supposedly being pansexual in this movie and in the franchise. And so all these people are boycotting the film because they don't want to see Lando like making out with boys or something in the film. And I'm like, what the fuck movie did you see? Like,
spoiler alert, this is a Star Wars. If anything, one of my issues with this movie is that it sort of does, there's a little bit of a gay baiting thing that happens that's common right now. It's not unique to this movie, so I'm not like hitting this film too heavily with it. But we see a lot of characters like Lando, like Deadpool, like Dumbledore, who the creators come out and say, by the way, this character's gay, this character's pansexual, this character's bisexual, and it never really materializes in film. And so for me, that's, as someone who supports gay cinema and wants to see more representation, I kind of take offense at that type of stuff. So someone that's not watching this because like the creators say Lando's pansexual, don't worry. You have nothing to worry about.
But yeah, also maybe rethink why you're not going to go see this movie in the first place, if that's your problem with it too. But
yeah, I'm like, did I fall asleep? Did I see Lando getting sexual at all? Like,
I think at one point he calls Han baby, but like I didn't see that as like a pansexual thing as much as it's just him being like, cool as fuck. Let's, hey baby,
Yeah,
right.
Hey baby, cool down, baby. Yeah, I could totally see that. That would be a character with Lando, but yeah, that didn't really bother me much at all.
All of that weight sits on top of this movie, and again, like, there's other movies that we've walked into and walked out of, like saying like, oh, Jim really liked this one and I was lukewarm on it and Brad didn't like it, and we have a fine like discussion, and that's sort of it. And we're having a fine discussion here, don't get me wrong, but like I do feel that like just everything that's going on online is just so much nastier than it needs to be for this film, which ultimately is either a thing that you absolutely love, or kind of at worst is like a, you know what, it was fine for the price of admission, I don't know. It's just, it's, I like debating film, but it just gets weird when like it gets this kind of nasty in the general discourse.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I know that during The Last Jedi, there was a huge backlash against the movie by a vocal, a vocal contingent of Star Wars fans, quote unquote, Star Wars fans, who I think took some kind of action online, right? To go to like Rotten Tomatoes, and like they all downvoted the movie.
Is that tomato bombing? Is there a name for it?
Tomato bombing, and brought down the audience score. God knows how many points, if they affected it, because there's a huge difference right now if you go look between the audience score and the critic score for The Last Jedi, which is kind of unusual for these big tentpole, popcorn space opera kind of movies. Usually it's the other way around. Usually audiences love these movies more than critics. That's just generally kind of how it goes. But I wonder if that's at play here with this movie too. Like, you have a strong voice group of fans. Now, Will, you and I mean, this movie didn't really resonate fully with you and I, but I'm not one of those guys that's going online like, oh, this movie sucks, and it's a big heaping pile of shit, because I didn't feel that way. And guess what? Even if I did, that's not me anyway. I'm not going to go out there and like crap all over it, in that kind of way.
Adrian and I have sniped a little bit, like kind of like ribbed each other a little bit over this one, but that's been about it. Like, it's like, playful movie discourse. Right. But there really is, like, there are stakes that are tied to sexuality and race and politics and all of these things that are sort of being unfairly cast against this film simply because it has the audacity to cast a black character, has the audacity to have more than one female character in notable roles. And we saw that same discourse with The Last Jedi and with The Force Awakens and with Rogue One. And I don't get it. There's reasons to like or not like these films for whatever reason.
That's not one of them.
But I don't get how someone can grow up watching Star Wars the way that we watch Star Wars, and loved these like scrappy rebels, and then come, be however many years later and say, you know what, my least favorite thing was when those women had the audacity to have power. And that is unfortunately a thing that is happening.
That's so interesting that you said that, because I guess I really haven't seen that backlash. Like, people know that Lando exists in the Star Wars universe, and they know that Leia exists in the Star Wars universe. And like, Reddit is a pretty dark and crazy place sometimes. I didn't really see much of that at all. It was more about the sexuality piece. I think people going into this movie, like, know Lando's going to be a part of it. They know women are going to be part of it. So I haven't seen like a huge like anti-black, anti-woman movement here. It's more the sexuality piece. But either way, I mean, it is unfortunate, whether it's that, whether it's, they got downtrodden because of The Last Jedi. I mean, whatever it is, I think the moral of the story here is like, go see the movie for yourself, form your own opinion, try to let go of maybe the past if you can, kill it if you have to, but see if it works for you. Guys, we're quickly burning through our time, and I know we have a lot of spoilers that we probably want to talk about. So how do we feel about making that transition? Are we ready?
I think so.
Yes.
All right. So for those of you who are listening or watching right now, if you have not seen Solo, A Star Wars Story yet, and you value your virginal innocence when it comes to its plot points, now is your time to step away for probably the next 25 minutes or so. If you're listening on digital tape delay, feel free to use the handy dandy time index in the show notes. Skip ahead to plugs at the end. You won't want to miss those. But we're going to go ahead and open the can of spoilers right now. Bobby Miller, I know you haven't seen it yet. Great having you hang out with us. We'll see you later. Goodbye to anyone else who's jumping off or stepping away for a little bit. Hopefully we'll see you back after you've had a chance to see the movie. But guys, spoilers are officially fair game. Let's start with the Han-Chewie friendship genesis. I know we've gotten a lot of comments in the live chat about that being something that worked for them. I'm really interested to hear how that worked for you guys. Was it something, even though you didn't really like the movie, that kind of worked for you though?
It's one of the things I did like about the movie for the most part. Like, there were a couple of things where I felt like they had to like pause the movie to like stop and explain a thing, and every time they did that it took me out. For example, there's this line where they're first introducing themselves to each other, and he says, Chewbacca, that's really hard. We're going to have to come up with a nickname, which is basically the genesis of how he came up with the nickname Chewie, which to me is not a thing that needed explaining because it's right there. Like, it's it's not hard for, like, I would imagine that most people hearing that name, that's a pretty easy way to abbreviate it. So I felt like when we saw that, it took me out. It also took me out a little bit because this film took so many pains to explain everything that Han Solo ever did. How did he get his pistol? How did he get those dice? How did he get the name Chewie? And yet, when it comes time to how did he already know to speak Wookiee? He just kind of already did. And I felt like, if anything, I would have loved to have heard more than just the throwaway line of that. Imagine the same movie if, not to rewrite a movie, but imagine the same movie if they didn't start off knowing the same language and they had to build a friendship through empathy, and we got to learn how like their friendship was built on something deeper before he does learn to speak Wookiee through his relationship with Chewbacca.
Star Wars, enemy mine.
Yeah. So that's what I need. That's what I needed more of out of that. Otherwise, it was fine. I think Chewbacca is probably the most, to me, probably outside of the Phoebe Waller Phoebe Waller-Bridge L3 character was probably the most fully realized and interesting character in this movie. So I no huge problem with him.
So let me ask a question, because this has come up several times already about, we didn't need to know how Han got this, we didn't need to know how to do that, blah blah blah. I mean, we got all that stuff about Luke in the original trilogy. So what's the bad thing about getting that about Han now? Like, we saw how Luke got his first lightsaber. We learned how Luke learned to use the Force. We learned who Luke's dad is. Like, Han didn't have all those details fleshed out. We got some throwaway lines about his backstory, but that was it. So why is it a bad thing to go back and flesh this character out?
It's not a bad thing to go ahead, Jim.
No, well, for me, it's different because, like I said, I think I knew everything I needed to know about Han up to the point of the main story. We didn't have to go back and show me all those things, which seems to me the whole purpose of this movie. The whole purpose of this movie was to show those things. In the original series, as you said, with Luke, it was woven into the narrative of the hero's journey. As part of that story, it wasn't just a story to go back and color in a character that we already knew a lot about. To me, that was the difference. But to answer your question about the Chewie thing, I mean, it was a little corny for me. I wish it was handled a little bit better. I don't know. I love Chewie as a character, and I loved seeing them come together. Brad, you telegraphed it a lot ahead of where I was, because as soon as they mentioned the Beast in the movie, Brad leans over and says, "This is where we get Chewie," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, really?" And then I saw the feet come out, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, he's right." I'm like, why didn't I think of that?
He was this Chewie muddy buddy.
Yeah, his muddy buddy. But yeah, I mean, it was a little eye rolly, like, oh, I don't know what the language is, like
Wookiees.
Wookiees or whatever it is. You know the language too. That kind of throws me back. So, and it wasn't that. It was that the fact that I imagine that everybody who Chewbacca ate before he got to Han Solo didn't know the language. So maybe that was it. I don't know.
It cast Chewbacca in a different light, but like, which isn't a bad thing, I guess.
Yeah, he must have.
The analogy itself is, I maybe disagree with slightly, just in that we did go back and learn more of like the Luke, like the stuff that got Luke to A New Hope, and that's the prequel trilogies. And I would argue that just as much, like, those were probably overstuffed with too many examples of trying to connect dots when we didn't necessarily need them. Han's arc in A New Hope is really compelling because he starts off as a scoundrel smuggler, right? And through the film, he gets sort of swept up in this thing reluctantly. Spoilers for New Hope, by the way. He gets swept up in this thing, and he has to make this decision: is he going to join the rebels, or is he just going to go his own way? And he at first opts to do that before having a change of heart and coming back and doing the save at the Death Star later on. So his arc goes from scoundrel to reluctant hero to actual hero through a very, like, and we get to see it happen organically. So a little bit, like, explaining too much of his backstory, I think, demystifies that a little bit. Like, and again, you can't have him have too much of a heroic arc here, because if so, it actually spoils that scoundrel that we see in the bar. You know, it's not as compelling an arc in A New Hope if he's already a hero going into it. That said, if he's too dramatically different, then it's not Han Solo as we know him. So again, I don't have a problem with them filling in some gaps. That's why you do a prequel, and that's what this is. This is a prequel, and it's, you know, it was fun to see the Kessel Run. I wasn't excited with how it played out, but like, it was cool. It was cool to see him like meet Chewbacca for the first time. I just think I had a problem with them trying to over explain all of the different things. We got to see him get his blaster. We got to see him come up with the nickname for Chewie, and that was probably a little much for me personally.
See, I think the thing for me is, like, one of the problems I've always had with A New Hope is, like, Han Solo starts off as this, like, you know, he's older than Luke. He's already had life and experiences and been out there and done things. Luke is, you know, still at the, I was going to go to Tashi Station and get power converters 19-year-old kid mode, right? So we're seeing Luke sort of take his first steps, whereas Han is already established. So with Han's arc in A New Hope, yes, he becomes this reluctant hero, but, like, did enough stuff really happen in A New Hope to, like, justify, like, this Han character, like coming about and, like, becoming this hero? And I would say yes, to some degree it does, but I've always wondered, like, if he is this scoundrel who, like, fucking blows Greedo away first, like, he doesn't even hesitate, at least in the original version of the movie, you know, gunning this guy down in the middle of a bar, like, how does he become this hero? And one of the things that I really love about Solo that kind of blew me away, and I didn't expect it, is it sets up why he's a reluctant hero. And we haven't really talked about Woody Harrelson yet in this film. And Woody Harrelson wasn't great in the movie, but the character served a really great purpose. And that is, you know, Han starts out with these good motivations, these good intentions. He ends up getting involved with Woody Harrelson and his crew. And Woody tells him, you know, Beckett tells him in the beginning of the film, he's like, you know, don't trust anybody. Everybody will betray you. And Han Solo's like, I know better. He does his own thing. Like, he forms relationships, and he almost has this like father figure in the Beckett character in a way. And then it's this very father figure who betrays him at the end of the movie. And for me, you know, that combined with Kira then betraying him and going in her own direction really sets up why he's not trusting and why he runs away. From the moment in the bunker when, like, Chewie goes to do his own thing and Han runs off just like normal Han, them coming back together at the end, it makes his character in A New Hope make so much more sense to me. So maybe we didn't need to see him get his blaster from Beckett, but I think, you know, in terms of, like, the deep story stuff about why characters are the way they are, we got so much of that about Luke, and now we finally got it about Han, and I think that was brilliant.
Well, I don't disagree either. I think those were the arc elements that were good. Like, I think that what this prequel movie needed to do more of were the broader stroke stuff that let us see more of how Han became the character that he was. And we got some of that. And I do think the Woody Harrelson character was a good character. It was a bad casting for it. I don't think he was the right person to pull that off. But like, you know, I think the lessons that
Hunger Games again
were good. Mine really comes down to just like all of those small things took me out of the film so much whenever they came up, because it really was just sort of like, hey guys, remember that thing? This is the scene where like he's going to learn how to do that thing, and the Star Wars score is going to, like the variant of that John Williams score is going to swell in the background so that we know it's significant. And that was unnecessary and it was unneeded, and it sort of robbed the emotional depth of these better things that did happen. He did learn how to both operate on his own and operate with a group of friends, and also how not to fully trust anybody through the course of the film. And that's the through line that I wanted to see more of. But we just got distracted by other shit. I want to get over to the L3 character in a little bit, but I know we probably have more to talk about for Solo himself, so I'll concede the floor till we get to L3.
I just wanted to ask you guys, like, I think as I try to think about what my issue with this movie is, I don't really like, in any franchise or movie, I don't like fan servicey stuff. And this movie is almost, in a way, it's almost built on fan servicey things. Like, I'm going to service the fans by showing them more of the how, what went into the recipe for Han Solo, right? I'm going to show the blaster, and we're going to wink, wink. And I'm going to show how Chewie got his name, and I'm going to wink, wink. I'm going to show how Han Solo got his name, and I'm going to wink, wink. And every time that happens, I roll my eyes. It's only a way that this movie could be fan service and fulfill that role without coming across as overt fan service. I think it would have worked better for me. You know what I mean? It's tough though, because this type of movie is all about servicing the fans, but without coming across as overtly fan service. That's hard.
It just needed to tighten some of its bolts a little bit more, and I think that was the missing element for me. Like, this is not I don't come out of this thinking like this is an actually bad film, because if it were, I think we'd be having a much different conversation.
No.
This is a film that had some loose bolts that I wish that it had tightened up, because those loose bolts, I think, make the whole ship a little bit more rickety than it deserves to be.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of those loose bolts for me was the ultimate fate of L3. So a little bit about L3. So I think she was one of my favorite characters in this film. She's this robot assistant / co-pilot to Lando.
A droid, right?
The what's that?
Yes,
a droid.
Another sassy droid. That's right.
Another sassy droid. And her whole thing is like robot rebellion, liberation, fight the power, stick it to the man, so to speak. And we get to see sort of a compelling arc for her as she both explores her humanity through like kind of the way she sees her relationship with Lando, and how she ultimately fulfills one of her wants by leading this giant droid rebellion, in the mines. And I thought that was fantastic. Also with the fact that this is a character who was able to do the sassy thing in such a way that it wasn't distracting for me. It was interesting. It added some fun and some levity, which I think action adventure films need, right? That's part of the formula, and I think she served that really well. But here's my little soapbox thing. I feel like they really dropped the ball with what they did with her at the end. So they killed this
really
dramatically so. And it was in the way they presented it. So you have this character whose goal is, I want to liberate droids. She dies by getting shot, and her ultimate fate is being attached in this ship, and without choosing to do so, without being given the option, she's enslaved inside of the ship. She ultimately suffers the same fate that she's trying to liberate all these other droids from. And I don't have a problem with that. if it was done with a bit of like pathos or poignancy or something, or even with just like the irony of that particular situation being done. As it was sort of played with sort of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This is why the Millennium Falcon is called a she, is because there's a female droid inside of it. That's why Han calls it she. And I felt that that really cheapened the character, and it cheapened her death, and it cheapened her goal in ways that was disappointing for what was probably my favorite character in the movie.
See, I think the absolute complete opposite. I think it created the mythos of the Millennium Falcon for me. Like in the original trilogy, the Falcon was always temperamental. It was always fighting Han and Chewie. Like, you know, they were always having issues with it. C-3PO at one point is even like hooked up to the Falcon, and he's like, where did your ship learn to communicate? Like, you know, it's so bizarre. Like, for me, it gives the Falcon a character. And yes, maybe it steals her agency by taking away a woman's power. Like, I get that. And there's some truth to that maybe. But like, the reality of the Star Wars universe is droids are fucking slaves. No matter how sassy they are, no matter how cool, bleep, 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 bloop, bloop, winky, winky they are, like, that's what droids are. That's what they're meant to do. You don't see droids like, you know, walking around doing their own thing all the time. They're owned by people. They're sent on missions. They're sent to do things. So in a way, I kind of like that she ended up in the Falcon. I like that she's the soul of this ship. I like that she has some agency in terms of like being a part of this greater good that's happening in the galaxy, as opposed to, hey, L3/Elite, go deliver this message for me. Like, I think it gives her a greater place in the Star Wars universe than just C-3PO walking around waving his arms.
If that were presented that way, I would be with you, but it wasn't. This is a character who was very specifically given the short-term motivation of, I want to liberate robots from bondage, and her ultimate fate is being forever bonded in this particular thing. Yes, this is a reality of the Star Wars universe, but this really like took this big neon sign to this very distasteful part of it. Yeah, droids are slaves in this thing. They have no agency. And if your film is going to create a character who is antithetical to that, who wants to rise above that, and then play their fate as basically ultimately falling into that same trap, and then you play it with sort of a wink and a nod towards the audience, this is why she's temperamental, I feel like that is I don't feel like that is a very narratively sound way of doing that. I think they could have done the same thing in probably a multitude of different ways that, again, you add some more pathos or some more irony to it, you know, even including some lines there at the end, like, man, she would have hated this, but at least we know that, you know, like, I don't know, you can do something to write around the fact that you've basically enslaved your character who is trying to liberate.
Question:
slaves.
Would you rather she just have died and been gone?
Yes.
And that's the end of it.
Absolutely.
Rather than living on to be part of the rebellion
based on her
help
character
destroy
arc,
evil.
Based on her character arc within this film, 100%. If they had done something different with her, if we had seen her interfacing more with the ship and saying, like, making lines along the lines of, like, I want to be a part of this ship forever, you know, whether it be, you know, like as the co-pilot or something like that.
But isn't that too winky winky direct what you've been complaining about like the whole show? Like,
it's a no. I mean, there's things that are part of the mythos and there's things that are not. But in this case, like, my problem is that the character's motivations are to liberate slaves. She becomes a slave to the ship, and the film doesn't acknowledge that. I feel like that's lazy script writing. It's connecting the dots because the ship has to be temperamental without recognizing the irony or the pathos of the situation.
But that's not her only motivation, and you're forgetting about the other motivations where she's in love with Lando and she wants to be with Lando for all time and do this whole thing with Lando, and now she gets to be.
No, she doesn't. He loses the ship 10 minutes later. Lando loses the ship 10 minutes later.
And he gets it back in Return of the Jedi and flies around the Falcon for 2 years before they are able to save Han.
A legitimate nerd war going on. This is awesome.
I mean, she gets what she wants in the end. She still gets to be with Lando after Han is taken to Jabba. She's reunited with Lando. Like, I don't know. I don't think it's as black and white as you make it out.
I think that's one way of looking at it. I think if what Will's saying is if we had, if there was a way they could have recognized her lack of agency in the actions that they took after her death, maybe it would have been more noble. You know, her existence would have been more noble.
That's all I needed.
You know. Oh, okay. They didn't do that. They kind of played it off as a joke. I get it. I think us as fans, though, see that she's able to kind of live on. The problem with that, though, is in this universe, as everybody's already decided, droids are slaves. So I don't think it's in these characters to recognize droids as, you know, to all of a sudden like that to recognize droids as having their own agency just because one of the droids said it. You know what I mean?
But the scripts try to give them agency. Like, the script tries to give the characters so much agency. It's sort of like they wrote themselves into a corner that they couldn't write themselves out of. They had to connect all of these dots. They built her up as this character with these specific motivations, and then it didn't care that they had these motivations because that's just the way the world is. And again, that's great if played for pathos or played for irony or played with gravitas. But she ended up being we need navigation systems, so let's just put her in. And she was very functional. And again, if I'm going to follow a character, I want to follow their character arc, you know. Even C-3PO or R2-D2, like, we care about those characters when things happen to them. And if R2-D2 was to be just like obliterated, like just like turned to dust, like he's never to be seen again, all of his pieces are scattered, he's disassembled, and like, that would be sad for us as fans, because he, granted, he is a droid and he's a slave, but he is also like, he is a character. And
so would you have had the same issue if R2-D2 was uploaded into the Falcon's computer after he's obliterated?
Maybe less so. If is R2-D2's character arc about how I want to liberate the droids from their bondage?
R2-D2's character arc is I want to help my friends and do good for the rebellion.
Fair.
So then maybe that's even more noble than I want to lead a droid rebellion. So if this character who's so beloved gets obliterated and his soul is uploaded to the Falcon and he gets to continue, would you have the same issue as a woman having her agency taken away by a man?
It's not a woman having her agency taken away by a man. It's a character having her agency taken away by the script. And that's the thing. Like, R2-D2 did not have those same, like, I want to liberate all the droids from bondage character arcs things. So I think that there's a world of difference between those two.
But was that her main character arc? I mean, that came about in the last 20 minutes of the movie. The first hour and a half of the movie was her pining away for Lando and making quips. So, like, was that her whole character arc?
Her absolute first introduction, if you'll remember, is she's at the, like, when the droids are having their fight down, and we get introduced to her, she's saying, "You don't have to do this. You can stop. You need to rise up." Like, so our introduction to this character, the first thing we know about her, before we even know that she's the co-pilot, we know that she's a droid who wants droids to rise up. That's the very first thing that we learn about her.
So why did she spend 45 fucking minutes pining over Lando instead of telling every character that will listen that droids need to be free?
She spends a good deal of time spending on that. Okay. So agree to disagree. I think we have other points on this. I just wish that they had written this character's demise better. That's all I wanted out of the script, is just
I think people attach themselves to this character. She was a compelling character, as compelling a character as a droid. I mean, this character has a problem with creating beloved droid characters and then killing them off lately. I don't know what it is, but like, we saw that in Rogue One. Spoilers for Rogue One. We get it here, and this is like kill your gays, except it's kill your droids.
Except in this case, the droid gets to live on in some fashion instead of just being gone.
Right. So what we're getting to the mashup of Star Wars and Westworld, called Star Wars World, where the droids like rise up and like take their agency and take their revenge on the rest of the galaxy. That's what's going to happen.
I would buy tickets to Star Wars Maximum Overdrive anytime. But we do have other things to discuss, so let's just move on. What else did you guys want to touch on?
Oh, boy. Action scenes?
Yes.
I thought the train action scene was a lot of fun. I really liked that one. The other one's not as much. I really, I thought, like I said, I thought the train action scene was it was cool to see how the train articulated. And I'm like, oh, they're totally going to make a ride out of this for the new Disney World, Star Wars land. That could definitely be a ride that I would pay money to go on. But the one that I didn't like was the space creature that kind of came out and chased them at one point, the giant space creature. It was too much of, I think, a callback to, was it Empire Strikes Back? When they were kind of in they thought they were in an asteroid, but it was really inside. I don't know. They were in an asteroid, but it was like a giant space worm chased them and then tried to bite them. And it was almost like the same shot, like at the end when they were escaping. That was an eye roller for me. But otherwise, I mean, like I said, it was hit and miss, I guess. Some really good action scenes and some not so great.
That train sequence was gold. Like, I was a little thrown off by some of the early action scenes. Again, like maybe the first 30 minutes or so of the movie, everything was shot so dark.
The car chase.
I like muted cinematography. I love moody style, but it was so dark that I couldn't tell what all was happening for some of those first action scenes. Like the nighttime battle scene, it's okay that I didn't see as much there. But when they're driving and fighting in the sewers in that opening scene, like there was, I just couldn't tell what was happening. But that train scene was beautifully lit, beautifully animated. I always had a good sense of location, and that's important for me with these sprawling action scenes. Like if a character is over here and another is over here, and then this happens, I always know sort of where the characters are in relationship to each other, in relationship to the action. That was really well choreographed here. Great action sequence. The space, the Kessel Run itself, I lost a little bit of that. Yeah, I knew where all the characters were. They were in the Millennium Falcon, but just some of the stuff that they were doing was a little esoteric, just sort of like, okay, we're going to go through these, go through the mists and, we're going to go through the space fog and try to get out the other side. It wasn't bad. It's just like, it was a little more random than I normally like. And I don't like that in other movies too. So it's like, it's not like a problem with this movie, but those types of action scenes, we have to go through this asteroid field when we get through, don't really do much for me. But yeah, that train scene was gold. That train scene was everything I wanted out of this movie.
Yeah, when you think about like a fun, like popcorn Star Wars movie, like I don't know, the action sequences are a big part of that for me. And so, the underground battle at the beginning of the movie and also in the bunker, they're dark places. I mean, I've never run through a dark bunker or sewer system having blaster fights myself, but I don't expect that those dark places are going to be beautifully lit and you can see everything happening. So it made sense to me that it was dark and it was murky and, oh my God, a blaster bolt out of the dark. Who's shooting that? Oh, here comes the, dude running out of the dark. Like that actually worked for me. It heightened some of the tension of those scenes. The train scene, I liked that, but it was a little too like Breaking Bad meets like Ocean's 11 for me. Like that's where the movie kind of went off the mag rails for me a little bit. Especially when Thandie Newton of Westworld fame, like spoiler, like blows herself up to save everybody from the droids that are flying around to go attack them. I don't know, that kind of jumped the rails for me a little bit. It got back on it. I liked the Kessel thing. As a fan of the books, it was really neat to see like Kessel and the Maw and all of these iconic places like brought to life on the big screen. I know the extended universe books are now the Star Wars legacy books, like they're not canon anymore, but it was great to see these places fleshed out. But speaking of things, not canon are now canon or not, I don't know. What did you guys think of Darth Maul suddenly showing up? He's still alive, guys.
It felt, I don't know, like I think I was supposed to be more excited for that than I was. Part of it's because I know that he has a bigger role in Clone War or the Clone Wars cartoon, and which I haven't watched. So my exposure to Darth Maul is he was the acrobat played by Ray Park, who didn't say anything but had like one kind of over choreographed fight scene in one of the Star Wars movies. So when I see him back and now with like a decent amount of dialogue and like menace, I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, it's that dude. I don't know. Like, are we going to see him now in? Well, yeah, that's, I guess, my question back is like, what is this setting up? Like, where are we going to see him now? Are they going to, where else in this universe is that character going to go? Or was that just included for just the shock and awe of it, and that's it? Which is fine if that's the case. But I walked out of it wondering, like, well, what does this mean?
Yeah, where does he go for the next 20 years? You know what I mean?
Well, I mean, Alden Ehrenreich did sign a 3-picture deal. So it's not inconceivable, once upon a time that they might have thought we could have had a solo sequel. If the movie continues to do as badly as it is, then maybe that may not happen. Those plans may get shelved. I don't know, but it almost seems like they're planting the seeds for another movie after this, perhaps.
I see. So he doesn't exist in the new main storyline.
Well, no,
the Last Jedi and all that stuff.
I won't give spoilers because I know for a fact there's 3 people in the chat I've personally talked to that want to check out Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels. But Darth Maul's like ultimate, story is sort of told in that sense. And because those cartoons are the only things outside of the movies and some of the newer books that are canon, I mean, we already know a lot of things if you've watched those shows. So that's why we don't see Maul show up in like Last Jedi or whatever, because other stuff is going on 30 years prior. Yeah. And
those animated shows are canon. I mean, he's more than just the dude that got cut in half, which, it's cool. Yeah, I mean, I didn't have a problem with it because I know that he has more of a role to play or elsewhere, but it part of it also, and I know that this is probably something that you guys are not feeling as much. I didn't like the Kira character, and I didn't like, and part of it's because I've seen Emilia Clarke act well in exactly one thing, and that's been as Daenerys. Whenever I see her in something else, I feel like and you get this with actors and actresses sometimes. People who are good at one specific thing, and then when you see them in other things, it's like they're not as good. And I even think that some of the Daenerys stuff falls apart too. The more she gets to stretch her wings. So I don't know. Like I kind of felt like, oh shit, like this character that I don't have a connection with because I haven't watched the animated series has now made away with this character I don't have a connection with because I don't think she was acted well. So for me, it was sort of a nothing burger, but I could get how some other people might be more excited based on their connections.
Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. Of course, I haven't read any of those books. I didn't really see the Clone Wars. Was that a series or a movie?
It was an animated series. Yeah. Well, it had an animated movie too.
So the appearance of Darth Maul, I mean, I kind of knew him from the prequel, one of the prequel movies, or maybe 2 of them. I forget. But I didn't really fully get the impact of his appearance in this movie. So I think it kind of just washed over me. I mean, I recognize the guy. He looks cool. I know he's some kind of villain. He's some kind of dark lord, right? So that's the extent of what I know about him. So, but you're right. I guess if we see another Han Solo focused movie, like a sequel to this movie that's still before, I don't know, the timeline. I don't even know if Darth Maul exists in, like I said, in the main story timeline, or he just existed in the prequels. Like, did he get killed in the prequels?
He got chopped in half in the first of the prequel, but then you found out in the animated show that he has more stuff going on.
Okay.
He didn't. We won't go too far beyond that, but he didn't really die in episode 1, The Phantom Menace. He lived for another day and somehow made a return.
But he doesn't make an appearance in any other movie other than that series, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah,
these are his only 2 film appearances.
Okay. Okay. So yeah, I can see that, like I said, how fans of the whole series would find it really awesome that he appeared, maybe, or like shocking that he appeared. But to me, it was just there's another guy I recognize.
I wonder where it's going to go, because like in A New Hope, like, Han talks about like the Jedi being like a myth and stupid mythology. And, he has to see the Force in action and everything before he comes to like believe in it or whatever. So like if there's a Solo sequel where like Han and Kira are fighting against Maul or something, and Maul is using the Force with his with his lightsabers. Like, that to me would make New Hope and Han's attitude not make sense.
Especially since one of the things that kind of felt that I had a problem wrapping my head around was maybe where all of this fit in the timeline, just because I know that this was before A New Hope, but we have the Kira going off with Darth Maul stuff, which is weird because of the Jedi stuff that you just mentioned. But also, after he gets the Millennium Falcon, like, one of the next things that he's really thinking about doing is going and, I guess, working for Jabba, right? Like, because he's gotten this like tip about this like gangster on Tatooine, and he should go check that out. So I almost would, I guess, if I were writing the Solo sequel, I would maybe skip the Kira and Darth Maul stuff, just because, I mean, maybe it's better just for her to be this like tragic character that was lost, and in a way that he wasn't able to save. And instead, maybe the Solo sequel would be more about like him doing some like crime stuff and maybe losing his way, getting more bogged down into the gray stuff, so that we can get him to that like scoundrel that he is at the beginning of A New Hope, or at the cantina scene of New Hope. So that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see him just doing some kind of morally, maybe not evil stuff, but just like some stuff that sort of like is a little bit unscrupulous for Jabba, and sort of seeing how that plays out.
All right. Well, guys, before we get to some quick plugs to wrap us up, any final thoughts on Solo: A Star Wars Story?
There's also kudos to Jon Favreau, as he did the voice acting for Rio.
Yeah,
Rio. Right, Rio.
I was trying to place that voice, and I couldn't until the end. I'm like, oh fuck!
His name is Rio, and he's buried in the sand.
Yeah, I like the character a lot.
Yeah, it was a cool character. It was the character was like, again, he had that like sense of like fun and adventure. He obviously had a tragic death, which happens for some of these characters in these movies. We only got to see a little bit of him. We saw probably as much of him as we needed to see, but what we saw was cool. Like, it was a cool character for the role he played.
Very cool.
All right. Well, that sounds like that brings us to a close for Solo. I'm glad we didn't get any Solo puns, because, guys, after the last few days of reading the internet, I'm done with the Solo puns. But let's go ahead and move on to some very quick plugs, and then we'll wrap things up here. This is the fun part of the show where we try to turn you on to some things that we are maybe loving and enjoying in the film / TV / video game / music / whatever. We've plugged things that aren't even remotely related to movies in recent weeks. So, Will, why don't you kick us off? What do you want to plug this week?
So I had a really pleasant experience at the movie theaters this weekend with this movie called First Reformed, which is the new film by Paul Schrader. Now, Paul Schrader, he's the guy, he's given us some pretty solid films over the years, but most of those are a little bit further back. Think like Taxi Driver and the one that was the remake of Wages of Fear, and I can't remember the name of it right now. Sorcerer. Two fantastic sort of like, people have these on the top of their best of lists ever, and with good reason. He's kind of fallen down for me a little bit lately. Like, I had this movie called Dog Eat Dog a few years ago that was just all over the place. But First Reformed is Paul Schrader at his like taxi driver best. Like, this is the goods. It stars Ethan Hawke. He's this pastor of this little church that's sort of like this historical monument. And right across the street from it is one of those giant sprawling like mega churches that has sort of taken over control of it, but the little mini church, but leaves it open as a touristy type thing. He meets this environmental activist played by Amanda Seyfried from Mamma Mia and other things, and her husband. And after something kind of major happens, his whole world gets absolutely rocked. And Guys, like it's one of those movies that you walk out of like shaking a little bit and just sort of like you're driving home just thinking like, well, I'm not going to listen to music. I'm just going to like think about what I just saw. And then you get home and you sit on the couch and you're just like, wow, like, and that meant that, okay, and because of that, wow. I love cinematic experiences like that. This was a movie that played at South by Southwest, but it was in a block that we just weren't able to see. And man, I wish I had been able, like, you know, and I'd been turned off by the last Paul Schrader movie I'd seen too. But I kind of wish I had prioritized this one because this movie is the goods. It's in theaters right now. It's called First Reformed, and it is it's just magnificent.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's fully wide yet. I don't know if it's here or if it's just like it's on one of these like art house slow roll.
I think it's expanding out. Yeah,
but this I saw the trailer for this like several months ago, and I know we missed it at South by. But when I saw the trailer, I'm like, oh fuck, man, I got to see this movie. Ethan Hawke. It looks like one of these like you know, he's a religious guy. He's in this like you know. What's the word I'm looking for? He gets stuck in this is like conundrum, test of faith or whatever you want to call it. But it looks great. It's on my list. I can't wait to see it. But yeah, be looking for it.
All right, Jim, what have you got this week?
I just today, actually this morning, I caught up with a movie that I was waiting to hit HBO called The Tale. And this is a movie that just got released on HBO. This movie stars Laura Dern, Elizabeth Debicki, John Hurt is in this, Jason Ritter, Ellen Burstyn is in it, Frances Conroy. It's got a really good cast. This is a movie about this woman who is like in her 40s, 50s. She's investigating a memory. Her past has been dredged up, and she's forced to re-examine her first sexual relationship when she was really young. And there's a lot of the stuff, because the girl is very young in this, that is tough to watch. And has to deals with sexual abuse and stuff. Laura Dern is great. The girl in this who plays Jenny, the young girl, is Isabel Nalise. I saw her in a movie called Mommy a while back, as a little kid. She's really great. This movie is fantastic. It's written and directed by Jennifer Fox, I believe it's an autobiographical story. So it's pretty astounding that she was able to take her own story, which is really dark and really troubling, and come up with a movie that's really effective. And there's some great directorial and writing touches in this that I liked. It's called The Tale, Tale. Laura Dern, check it out. It's on HBO right now.
Love me some Laura Dern. I'm sorry I walked into this movie for the last 5 minutes, but what I did see of it was very, very powerful. So, Jim, I can only, speak with limited experience, but I will co-sign your plug anyway, because Laura Dern is amazing. Of course. For me this week, in the 80s, I was in love with this little movie about a little dweeby kid who learns karate to protect himself from bullies and enters a karate tournament and wins the day. Of that movie, of course, is The Karate Kid. And I haven't really thought a lot about the Karate Kid movies since Hilary Swank was the next Karate Kid way back when. But a new show came out on YouTube Red a couple of months ago called Cobra Kai, which is basically a revisit of the Karate Kid in a way, except the show takes place like 30 years later. And instead of following Danielson as the main character, it follows Johnny Lawrence, who was Daniel's opponent in the All Valley Karate Tournament at the end of the Karate Kid. And it sees Johnny like broke and destitute, and his big dreams have been dashed. And Johnny was always just this fucking bully meathead character from the first movie that I hated. And I won't give spoilers for the show in case you haven't seen it yet, but like, I want to go back and rewatch The Karate Kid so much now, because I feel like it takes this character and I guess a lot like Solo did, take that for what you will, fleshes out a whole lot about this character that like reframes him and changes my whole thinking about the Karate Kid. It's great to have Ralph Macchio back as Daniel. Daniel has a story in this show as well, and it's interesting to see sort of their rivalry and their relationship as adults now 30 years later. If you loved the Karate Kid, Jim, would you characterize this show as sort of a dark comedy / drama?
Yeah, it's a dramedy. It's I think it's way better than it has any right to be. It sounds really schmaltzy, but and sometimes it does dip into schmaltz a little bit. But I think there's some really sharp writing in this, and the way they work, the way they've crafted these characters, they're not caricatures anymore. They're complex characters, and that's what I like about the writing on this show. And it's doing very well. They've already got a second season lined up. So the first season is fully available now, right? On
it is.
How do we get it?
YouTube Red. It's available.
Red. Okay, yeah. So it was one of the things that made me
not RedTube.
Not RedTube.
That's a little different.
That's a little different. Yeah.
If you search for Cobra on RedTube, I'm sure you'll find some spitting snakes, but not the one you're maybe looking for.
Story checks out.
Or maybe you are. In any event, if you loved The Karate Kid as much as I did in the 80s, maybe not so much as sequels, but definitely check out Cobra Kai on YouTube Red. The whole first season is available right now. I don't know that we have a premiere date for season 2 yet. I didn't see one when I looked earlier, but I can't wait. All right. Well, I think that wraps us up for this week. Will, you're out of town next week, right? Or not available or something? Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So I'm going to be at Disney World for Gay Days, adjacent to all the tidal wave stuff that's happening. So I am going to be out of pocket for like a week straight.
Well,
that's a tough assignment, Will.
It's a tough assignment.
Sorry, you're going to miss the podcast.
Yeah.
I'm not feeling that bad.
I'm going to be hanging with the mouse.
Well, I hear it's going to be rain and thunderstorms that whole time, and I'm hoping that does not happen, because last time we were in Orlando and went to Disney, there was a fucking hurricane, and it was kind of crazy. So hopefully you can avoid that bad weather while you're there. We hope you have a good time, and a lot of our audience are going to be at Tidal Wave anyway, and probably not listening to the show. So we're still undecided if we're going to record next week. We may just skip the week and rejoin the week after, but we'll see. Keep an eye on Facebook and Twitter. You'll find out there if we're going to have an episode next week. But guys, real quick, in case folks want to interact, Jim, where can they find you online?
Look for me primarily on Twitter at JJP Out West. That's all one word, JJP Out West on Twitter.
There you go. And Will, how about you?
Check me out on Twitter at Whatever Cove. Also, I'm on Facebook, William Lindis. Just send me a message first. I'm on letterboxd.com, where I just blog every movie that I watch. Look for me as William Lindis there. And again, if you are looking around Disney World during Gay Days and you see a fat bearded guy, it's probably me. So come up and say hi. I will be the only one at all of Disney during Tidal Wave Gay Days, I promise.
I'm just imagining someone like going up to 400,000 different fat bearded guys. Will, is that you? Oh no, okay, never mind. Will. Yeah. So,
but you might be told no 399,999 times, but one time it might just be me.
Maybe.
So it's
we'll
worth
see.
it.
All right, and guys, you can find me on Facebook. Just search for Brad Harris. Send me a message first, so I know you're not a Russian scam bot. Thank you kindly. You can also find me on Twitter at iBradPro or on Instagram at MSUBigGuy. Guys, we'll see you all next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.